Welcome, everyone. My name is Jennifer Franklin. I'm the program director of the Hudson Valley Writers Center and one of the co-editors of Slapering Hall Press, along with our founding editor, Margot Taft-Stever and Peggy Ellsberg. And I would love to welcome you all to our special 15th annual Slapering Hall Press War and Peace reading. I want to thank all of our sponsors, Arts Westchester and NISCA, all of the foundations who support us, including the Bydale Foundation, the David G. Taft Foundation, the Rotary Club of the Tarrytowns, St. Faith's Foundation, the Alan B. Silfka Foundation, the Thendara Foundation, Zand Charitable Trust, New York Community Trust, Rockefeller Philanthropy, and of course, all of our members, students, and teachers, and all of the guests who make the Writer Center what it is. So we're very lucky tonight that we have Fred Marchant, who has been a featured reader for us before, who's one of our beloved instructors and an amazing Grey Wolf poet. And he is here to help us welcome Afaa Michael Weaver. So I'm going to turn us over to Fred.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 15th annual War and Peace reading series item in the series. I have prepared some remarks, and so if you see a piece of paper fly up like that, you'll know why. All right. It's a great honor and a true delight to say a few words of introduction on behalf of my longtime friend and a deeply inspiring poetry friend, Afaa Michael Weaver. Afaa is the author of 15 collections of his poetry, the most recent of which is Spirit Boxing in 2017 from the University of Pittsburgh Press. His first book, Water Song, was published in 1985, and then after several other books, in 2000 he published a new and selected poems, Multitudes. That was with Saraband. Then came the 21st century and the books that compose his collection, the Plumflower Trilogy. First came Plumflower Dance in 2007, then came The Government of Nature in 2013, and then City of Eternal Spring in 2014. Each of those from the University of Pittsburgh Press also. The work in those books has garnered many important honors and recognitions, most notably the Kingsley Tufts Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the May Sarton Award from the New England Poetry Club. That's only to name a few, I might add. Over the years, Afaa has also written plays, stories, essays, reviews, and has edited a literary journal. His has been a life devoted to poetry, and no small example of that devotion is the fact that he was a member of the first faculty of Cave Canem and is now an elder, officially an elder of that important organization committed to supporting, as they say in their mission, the many voices of African-American poetry. Afaa Michael Weaver was born in Baltimore in 1951. He went to public schools. He was a really good student, went to the University of Maryland for a couple of years, then left to work for 15 years in steel mills, factories, warehouses. These places were the site of what Afaa himself has called or named as his apprenticeship as a writer. That's a quote. During those years, he wrote in the off hours and in the corners of the workspaces. It was also during those years he began what would become a lifelong engagement with Chinese culture, language, and meditation practices. His work gathered some notice, and an NEA grant took him out of the factories, and he later completed his BA from SUNY Excelsior, then called Regents, and then went on to do graduate work in creative writing at Brown University. Speaking of universities, Afaa Michael Weaver is a great teacher. Among his various university appointments, he's held a tenured position at Rutgers and later on for 20 years or so in Boston at Simmons College. And that's where he recently retired from, I should add. One of the ways Afaa and I became friends is through a kind of next door workshop teaching in the writing conferences sponsored by the William Joyner Center for the Study of War and Social Consequences at UMass Boston. We also co-taught a set of workshops for Penn New England at the County House of Correction in Northampton, Massachusetts. In both of those settings, many of our students were veterans. And as we know, today is Veterans Day, and this is the War and Peace reading. Afaa Michael Weaver was in the U.S. Army Reserve, spending several months on active duty in 1970. Thus, he is a veteran in the most familiar way of using that word. But I wonder if we can also, on this day, imagine a more inclusive concept of veteranhood. One that would, for instance, include family members of veterans. And sad to say, war widows certainly would count, and descendants of veterans, and the great-grandchildren, say, of veterans. They too have some kind of veteranhood. And for me, individually, I think a more inclusive concept of veteranhood could very well extend to all sorts of folks who have endured and survived life and death struggles. As a Black man coming of age in this time in our country, Afaa Michael Weaver is not only a military veteran, but he's a veteran of the struggle for racial justice. He has endured and confronted other kinds of threats to life and well-being, not the least of which is his adult reckoning with childhood sexual abuse, as recounted in several of his poems. And given his work history, which he returns to in his imagination often, given his work history, especially in those early years, Afaa is a veteran of the struggles faced by anyone who's had to punch a clock or otherwise be turned into a cog in a commercial wheel. In this sense, Afaa Michael Weaver has multiple overlays of veteranhood. Put another way, those layers of veteranhood lend his work a depth of feeling and a richness of understanding. I would add to those layers several other sources of emotional truth and hard-earned understanding. For instance, we should look at his ekphrastic poems about Marc Chagall's paintings. And we should not forget how Chinese poetry, philosophy.
Those nurses are only that area. They're not allowed to go anywhere else.
I stopped because I heard all of that. Are we okay to go?
I'm just going to ask everyone one more time, mute yourself. I have to find the person who's not muted.
Okay.
It's me.
Okay, thank you.
All right, to continue, we should not forget how Chinese poetry, philosophy, and meditation practice, including maybe especially Tai Chi, is to his art. You will also find in his work an ongoing celebration of African American culture in general, in its specific ways of knowing and being, and especially as those are found in the African American literary tradition. When I think of all these layers of meaning, feeling, understanding, and art in Afaa Michael Weaver's work, I cannot help but think of that great line from a well-known Langston Hughes poem. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Afaa Michael Weaver is a poet whose lifelong journey in poetry has been to discover ways of nourishing the soul, finding ways of deepening, widening, and expanding the reach of the soul. This, to my mind, is what makes Afaa Michael Weaver one of our country's utterly essential poets. And so it's a great pleasure to say to Afaa Michael Weaver, welcome to the 15th annual War and Peace reading at Hudson Valley Writers Center.
Yes. There you go.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you so much, and for that heartwarming introduction. And I just say I miss you. Thank you, Jennifer, for allowing me to read this evening in celebration of veterans. I left the university, as Fred said, in 1970, when I was 18, and I joined an Army Reserve unit in Baltimore, the 342nd Army Security Agency, and took up factory work. And the arc of my journey as a poet has been to articulate the interiority of the working class, specifically the Black working class, and emanating from that. And I like to pay special tribute to all veterans, and especially those of us who struggle with complex PTSD. In my case, the childhood abuse was ignited, so to speak, by the loss of a child in that first marriage, and then basic military training. So I like to begin with reading some poems from this anthology that Kevin Young has done. There are 4 of my poems in there, including one that seems to be something of a favorite of a lot of people. It's Inside the Blues Whale, about an event that took place in late spring of 1979 when I was struggling with CPTSD, and I had become convinced that Tai Chi was a way to recovery and healing. But my family did not understand, and so there was something of a drama in the emergency room at University Hospital, where, by the way, I was born. Inside the Blues Whale, 1978 to 1979, for Vincent Woodard. It is not just my problem. It belongs to us all. I have been cajoled into coming to the emergency room where everything scares me. Black folks shoot and cut each other until they end here where guards have guns. I refuse to be taken upstairs and locked away. I was trying to think of a poem. It got me to this place. With my mother, I stand against the wall, guards on either side. They have guns, and this is my mother. It is now everybody's problem. A bird is singing in my hair, more important than Thorazine. My head is a tree stretching its leaves to burn in the sun. They say if I make a treaty to take the medicine, I can leave with my family since my family is crazy. I look at the guns on the hips of the guards and know I must be as still and quiet as death, or this will turn into psychosis as sick as nightmares. I am angry that they would have me here with my mother, angry at white doctors. I am in a whale in the ocean. Who can swim out to me? Who can cast a line? If I take out the first guard by breaking his neck, I can protect my mother, but it is more important that we are all now underwater, inside a whale who laughs. Later, the therapist they say likes me keeps talking about the appointment. She is doing something subliminal with the word come, repeating. She leans to me when she says it. It bothers me that such people think crazy people are stupid, but it is more important that my head is a tree with a bird singing in it, inside a whale in the ocean. The most important thing of all is that this whale that ate us likes to laugh a lot. He has the blues. And there are 4 poems of mine in that anthology from the Library of America. And I'd like to read another of those 4. And this is from the collection, The Government of Nature. Washing the car with my father. It is the twilight blue Chevrolet, 4 doors with no power but the engine, white wall tires, no padding on the dashboard, the car I drive on dates, park on dark lanes to ask for a kiss. Now my hand goes along the fender, wiping every spot, the suds in the bucket. My father's standing at the gate, poor and proud, tall and stout, a wise man. A man troubled by a son gone missing in the head, drag racing his only car at night, traveling with hoodlums to leave the books for street life, naming mentors, the men who pack guns and knives, a son gone missing from all the biblical truth, 10 talents, prophecies, burning bushes, dirty cars washed on Saturday morning. He tells me not to miss a spot, to open the hood when I'm done so he can check the oil, the vital thing like blood, blood of kinship, blood spilled in the streets of Baltimore, blood oozing from the soul of a son walking prodigal paths leading to gutters. Years later, I tell him the stories of what his brother-in-law did to me, and he wipes a tear from the corner of his eye, wraps it in a white handkerchief for church, walks up the stairs with the aluminum crutch to scream at the feet of Black Jesus. And in these brittle years of his old age, we grow deeper, talk way after midnight, peeping over the rail of his hospital bed as we wash the twilight blue Chevrolet. I still have bouts of guilt when thinking of how I treated that car. So I have the sunglasses because I recently had very successful cataract surgery, but I'm going to take them off so that I can read from the book Spirit Boxing. A third of those 4 poems in the anthology is from this book. And it's a poem entitled John Henry Sleeping in High Grass. This is an American sonnet. Mowers miles away, mud flies on top his hammer like they own it. His chest cresting and falling in shapes, shifting between sunlight and leaves, black steel his destiny. John is motion at rest, tides of moon and waves and still waters, suns igniting hearts of molten iron, a hardened conviction, rose petals in rain. Sleep is a dream, the real world a poundage, work a sentence for being his mama's son. The hammer in his crib, the supernatural a drum song of woodpeckers, cowbells in the field, heaven a home going back to a place before the bugle call to be born. Factories were designed to be perfect machines, and wheels inside wheels was one image or one guiding metaphor for industrial engineers. And human beings were to be machines inside the factories. And this is 19th century industrial engineering. And the first large mass production plant in the United States, in fact, the world, was in Baltimore, the Bethlehem Steel Company. And in this book, I move myself from myself and write about myself in the third person in a couple of poems, 3 actually, using the nickname that was given me in the warehouse. I worked in Procter & Gamble from 71 to 85. And they called me Freight Train. The worker we named a freight train and his revelation of Ezekiel's vision. In the stretched light of galaxies, the voice broke through crusted skin of old scars, ridges along valleys and the mountains of who he was. He sang the song in a music sheet of star to star, a harmony heard in the unseen world of wonder some call heaven, some call a higher, hotter hell than this world below. A man, a child, unhooked from the false wings of his own thoughts to fly into the brilliant fire of wheels of God's tongue. A gift he found in his eyes, not one some ache to have, a gift too hot to handle, a gift crafted to inspire envy should he live to mentor workers, should he survive long enough to know the hand on the heart. The grip on his soul was the hand of the origin of life, wheels churning all time, way past what any ego could hold. His mama and daddy crying in the corner, seeing him blown wide open, the seraphim around him, surgeons of air at the gurney handling organs of a spirit, given the hard road to sing the song of workers and know the loneliness of Moses. From the psych ward to the packing machines, towers, unfilled boxes, and tractor trailers, to live among the sane as insane, to bring the vision to their blind eyes of what waits for all of us. And I worked with men in the warehouse who were combat veterans, and there were several of us had PTSD, including myself. I was not a combat veteran, and but we were all there together, and I imagine that some of them were probably Trump supporters, and I remember them fondly. So this is not antagonistic at all. I remember them with fondness. And this is a truck driver from West Virginia. He called himself Billy, although we knew he had another name. Him here telling us how he hated white people, him as the white people we knew, but crisscrossed over in his mind by the groove Appalachia makes up and down the back of this country. His blues were made on the backs of folk more blue than black folk origins of the blues. Billy's so loud he could make loud hide itself in white shame. Taking his breaks with us, waiting for his truck to be filled with what washed the dirty laundry of a country he believed did not believe in him. Tipsy drunk as he was on the days he announced to us, he was a hillbilly, like a lone wolf howling, sitting on its back legs, lost in the woods, afraid of what to feel in a space empty of whiteness, filled with strange cruelties. This, the holy space of who can look down at us. His arm in a cast, Billy broke a thing harder than he was, the thing that tried to let him own a certain kind of dignity, the cab of his rig easing out of the truck yard, his baseball cap bouncing him back to the hills. Beatitudes, the merciful. And this is for my old friend George, who was a mechanic's helper in a mechanic shop. And every Monday we had a ritual. It was a kind of game. He would lend me $5. The following Monday I'd give it back. That same $5 bill went back and forth for a while. It was a game. Beatitudes, the merciful. A white man born in coal country, George knew the power of dirt, what dirt can do, raise you up a mess of vegetables and a season of kindness between the hard edge of the hills, a gift for the hungry, a white man born where not much grows. He knew the dirt of work, of chasing Rommel across the Sahara, taking hot showers with gasoline. He knew to be grateful for having lived a soldier and come home mostly whole, meeting me for our afternoon coffee, our blue shirts, our blue pants, our blues and 5 notes. You need that $5, Mike? To give me what he needed more than me, I took the 5 and gave it back 7 days from the first day of the week, back again for coffee, back again for what is not free. Our blues, the 5 notes of this ritual. Here's your 5 back, George, thanks. Need it again, Mike? Just say the word. A black man born in a still city knows the power of dirt, how hard things come out of it, go back into earth, where dirt is the clean thing of a world, a mercy seat for men who love kindness. $5 going back and forth until a day men are not only clean, but free. Another one of the Beatitudes poems, there are 2 of them. there were 3 brothers in the warehouse, and 2 of them had been to Vietnam, and they were white, and there was a third man, a black man who had been to Vietnam. I knew them all. We all had our issues, and they each had individualized struggles. But this is for all of the men and women I worked with in that warehouse at Procter & Gamble for 10 years. Every warehouseman knows the value of a good flashlight. I have about 10 flashlights around the house. Beatitudes, the peacemakers. If a brother has killed folk in war, he is one of the quiet ones at work, sitting with his coffee and lunch, patting the floor with his foot, waiting for the joke he can't make right now, but is working on inside a memory, peeling away the scars to find the innocence underneath. Ribbons of what was done, blessed by God and country, the corporation with a seal made in ungodly heaven, where wars are all there is. Inside is now this space with all of us, some of us who killed folk at home, some by accident or by mean intent, plans made when forgiving failed. Still others who have not killed strut like cocks on the walkway to trophies they can never have, and all the while there are the few who fear even the talk of war, who make the jokes and fetch the coffee, who take the butts of jokes, who run when running is what makes us one, as brother with brother, not bound by blood or love, but what we must do. This book was, the structure of it was inspired by these sculptures that were installed in the Cathedral of St. John of Divine by the Chinese sculptor Xu Bing. And so I imagine the structure of the book as a giant phoenix. And there is a belly and the tail and the wings. And I'd like to read something from a section that is more the belly than not. And these 2 poems, Making Soldiers, the first of them. The drill sergeant loved the asses and elbows, the only things he wanted to see. Summary of being busy at what we were told to do, crawling 100 yards on flat belly. Our elbows, alligator feet with tiny webs. Our own feet, the twisted fins of prehistoric fish undiscovered, or maybe being still in the place where we were going. Some jungle, some desert, some mountain on the other side of New Jersey. The state with gorgeous elbows. If you ever doubt, just turn the map sideways to find the arms of millions of people jutted out to show elbows to be, in fact, the half-ass of the arm, made whole only when the arms are pulled together with palms up in hasty prayer. In the swirl of doing the funky chicken, a sexy comfort food for hungry alligators, we stood at the edge of fields to learn how to grow rough leather skin, to kill inside the heart with a treacherous smile. Ode to the hard men. 2 old men in love for years, the 2 now one, joined at the hip, moving in the kitchen together to make their 2 dishes. Oatmeal for one while the other likes grits, then easing out to the porch together, one helping the other with his cane, to sit and be the odd ones in a small town where their oddness is safe. They own the evenings. They remember the sweetness of being young, strong, love making a thick thing, all of what mattered most of all, or surely should. The sun easing down in the coolness of autumn gold, rising from the brownness of nearing the end tinge of aging, of love growing old and rich. When they first met as short order cooks, mannered and manly in the way of loving men, their hips open wide to each other until now they sleep, their hips the shiny edges of spoons. So that's just a taste of a spirit boxing. And what I like to read, actually, there's one more poem from Spirit Boxing, which is a prelude to this other poem about Malcolm X. This is The Lay of Paradise, 1970, which goes back to the time I actually went into factory work. And 1970 was a difficult year, as some of you might remember. If you're as old as I am or older, it was Kent State, Jackson State, the invasion of Cambodia. It was a tough year. That was 50 years ago. The Lay of Paradise, 1970. 3-story overhead electric cranes clicking, tractors large enough to carry elephants rolling, mashing the wooden brick floor down, down, steel pins spinning so fast they have a silent hiss. Shears cutting shiny tin into thin plates at speeds fast enough to cut the bone away so cleanly a man has to remember to scream. The balers pulling scrap tin, arms, legs, heads, onto the pin to make them small enough to be melted, sold as Cadillacs or prayed over in graves. The soles of safety shoes of men and women tapping metal-plated walkways to workstations. I sit and sew word onto word. When the mill is down, I study the invocation and wait to see a poem come out from the skylight in the mesh of corrugated metal walls, a web of language, looking like nothing but carrying everything that makes everything, the crucible of metaphor. I am a child in the art. The art is a child in me. So I had the, my own set of influences. And when I left the university, I was inspired partly to do so by the autobiography of Malcolm X. And for reasons I still don't entirely understand, I was very impressed by the time he spent in prison. But in terms of the socialization of Black men in cities like Baltimore and the prison pipeline, I do understand that I was being prepared for that destiny, so in terms of social structure. But I was also not able to handle the sense of alienation at the University of Maryland. There were 33,000 students and 300 Blacks. And I was raised in Southern style segregation, but all of those things came to make my decision. And this poem, Malcolm X, is one that I worked on for 18 years. And it's my credo. And to me, Malcolm X's life is one of transcendence. And he was a trauma survivor. His mother was pregnant with him that night the Ku Klux Klan showed up to the house looking for his father. There's a new biography that was very well researched. His older brother tells the story. His brother was 11 that night they showed up. And his mother was later committed to an insane asylum. So this poem has lived in the center of my spirit for a long time, but I have not often read it. To Malcolm X on his second coming. Malcolm X, alias El Haj Malik El Shabazz, alias Malcolm Little, alias Detroit Red, deceased. The coffin breaks, fingers wriggle through clay, touch the light. A chiseled face comes full with flesh, eyes roaming the landscape of his own prophecy. Negroes in their infinities, Benzes and BMWs, chains of gold around their necks, 50 tons of gold for teeth, sneakers handmade in the glass pavilions of murderers. Hip hop stirring the empty souls up from this tomb and our lost hopes. He stands and prays into Allah's outstretched hands for mercy. This is why he came back. On a plantation porch, little Missy plays with Liza offering her lemonade. Liza, tell me again about them runaways you turned in, them bad bucks daddy hanged and cut up, Lovely little Eliza May, brown eyes, brown eyes. At 5 o'clock in the morning in Baltimore, in Philadelphia, in New York, in Newark, in Chicago, the fresh morning water of showers falls, and the followers of Elijah utter their morning prayers. Allah the beneficent, Allah the merciful. All praises to Allah and the nation of Islam. Hope of the resurrection of the so-called Negro comes to life, the life before the death of the master. Liza, where your mind, child? Me and the other boys had plans for being free and coming back for y'all. My mama raised you from a little nothing and you turned us in. Now we rotten in some place with no name, cut up like dog meat. Liza, where your mind? Malcolm walks in Harlem along the broken streets, gathering mystified eyes. In Sylvia's, he pokes his head in and asks what food there is for the soul. Some woman says, you look just like Malcolm X. You should have been in that movie that boy Spike Lee made. And she goes on cutting up custard pies and singing a gospel song she wrote. Malcolm goes over to St. Nicholas Avenue, looks down on the city. Afternoon shadows begin to fall like the difficult questions of his father. Malcolm mourns his mother, the abyss she fell into and could not escape, the abyss of his genius. In a glimmer, an angel settles on his shoulder, as small as a pin, but with a voice like a choir singing, no more grief, blessed son, no more grief. Malcolm falls to the pavement, sobbing for Elijah. Little Missy sits in her bedroom chair, sewing her eyes on her doll, singing. Liza listens to night sounds, afraid of darkening the door to tomorrow. Little Missy says, Liza, come around here and rub my feet before you go to my daddy's room. In the Audubon ballroom the night he was killed, Malcolm X saw his assassins rise amid a host of spirits battling for his life. Demons and angels filled the space, battling for his soft head, as his eyes took Allah's kiss. His murder was a rupture in the world of the spirit, the demons rushing desperately to name their position in the African heart, where the angels fought to defend God's voice uttering his own holy name, Allah. Malcolm's head hit the stage like a giant stone from Zimbabwe landing on earth. His mind took on its silence, while his spirit was filled with song. O blessed Son, come unto me, O blessed Son. In front of the Schomburg, Malcolm rises above the city, his mind covering all of Harlem while he issues the manifesto. On self-defense, strike me and I will strike you back. On freedom, freedom is a fire waiting to come. On the future, no profit will come from destruction. On the nation of Islam, the saved are still saving. Caravans form in the streets, unloading the unconscious souls. The open eyes of the living dead stare from windows and shops at this voice that is in every doorway, this body that is the landscape, as if the city is now flesh. In one moment he is there and then he is gone, letting their bodies go softly back into time. Negroes wonder what has been among them is now gone. Malcolm sits on steps on Convent Avenue, again just another man. An old woman pulling a cart comes to him, touches his head, and both of them vanish into Allah's wish. The wise among us chant the filling of our life with life. Take this fragment of a gift from heaven and anoint the heads of the young who are our promise to live. Teach, Master, teach. Teach, Master, teach. Teach, Master, teach. Wa alaikum salam. So I think that's my time. I don't want to go over. But thank you so much for this chance to read. Yeah.
Wow, that was so great. Thank you so much for reading that one, especially for us tonight. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. What a moving reading. I'm glad we recorded it too. Cindy, I'm so happy to welcome you tonight. As we said in the beginning, maybe before we were taping this, you've been working on this with Margot for the past 15 years. So it's a very special anniversary. It's the 15th anniversary of SHP's War and Peace series. It's the 30th anniversary of Slapering Hall Press. And what a wonderful way to celebrate it with Afaa Michael Weaver and with all of you reading tonight. So Cindy, please say a few words about what you've done with this series and introduce your readers for us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't want to take up too much time. I think this is really about our readers tonight, but I will say that over the years, you know, we've faced some difficult times, and I was telling Jennifer earlier, the hardest one I thought was when we had Hurricane Sandy, and the person who came to read from Vermont was coming to stay with me, and we had no power, and and fortunately, he was able to stay with Margot, but we never, ever predicted something like this. And yet poetry lives on, and that's what we do. I don't think I've been to as many poetry readings in years as I've been to between Dodge Poetry Festival and this. And it just is an honor to be part of Hudson Valley Writers Center, Slapering Hall Press. And thank you, Margot, for bringing me here when the Art Center closed. So it's a little different this year. We used to have maybe 10 people and community poets, and they'd send in advance. This year, of course, everything is very different, and we wanted to put this together. So we're very lucky. We have three writers. We have 2 poets and a prose writer, and each of them is going to read for 10 minutes. And our first reader is Jillian Lynn Katz, who has read through, I believe, Jillian, you've read before for Poets and Writers on War and Peace when you had to submit work ahead of time. So I'm going to introduce you first, and I know you want to be recorded, so it's okay. You have to take yourself off mute because I'm going to call on you in a moment. All right, Jillian, take yourself off mute. I can't. I
can do that for her. Let me just,
okay.
Yeah, in case she can't.
I'm so excited to see so many people here, people who I just love, and I don't get to see them until they all show up on. And some people I've seen so many times, I feel like I'm living with them. Okay. Jillian Lynn Katz was born in South Africa and immigrated to the United States as a teenager in the 1960s. She grew up in the apartheid era and has written and published extensively on this subject. She recently published her poetry book, Portrait, with Kelsey Books. She also published a chapbook, Kaleidoscope, with Finishing Line Press. She won 2nd place in the Greenberg Poetry Contest in 2012 and has been published in Inkwell, Westchester Review, Epiphany, Italics Mine, and other journals, and in anthologies, Magnum Opus 2019, Austin International Poetry Festival 2017, Best Emerging Poets 2017, Across the Long Bridge 2006. She has a Master of Arts in Writing from Manhattanville College and a Bachelor of Arts in Literature from Purchase College. She has taught creative writing and poetry to teenagers at the Scarsdale JCC in their summer arts writing program. Mrs. Katz is currently working on a novel about her experience of culture shock in combining American and South African culture into her psyche as a teenager. Please welcome Jillian Katz.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm so happy to be here. I remember the last time I came, I read in 2017 and we got lost coming and it was in the middle of the night. And today it was raining. So it's kind of easier to do this from, this is my office where I do my writing. So welcome everyone and thank you for coming. I visited my home country, South Africa, 2 years ago and toured Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela spent 18 of his 27 years in prison. My first two poems are based on the observations I made when I visited Mandela's jail cell. Inside Mandela's former penitentiary, a single oleander inside gray stone prison walls, a flash of pink blooms in clusters, deep green leathery land-shaped leaves arranged along the stems in whorls. I wonder, did you witness the ache of this poisonous plant when you were ordered not to sing as you cut the snow-white rocks in the lime quarry? Robben Island. Nelson, I walked where you walked for 3 hours inside gray cement walls where you chopped snow-white quarry stones in the heat, Mandela, on the windy prison island surrounded by the sea. Swaths of black kelp meandered in the ocean, floating free, like you wouldn't be, Nelson. I stood outside your cell, Mandela, 4 square meter circumference, where you spent 18 of your 27-year sentence. You slept on a straw pallet on the stone floor, brown blanket, small green table, red bucket with a lid. Your walls and door were steel see-through bars, more prince than prisoner, dressed neatly in prison clothes, leaning on a spade. You sealed your scrolls, buried them in tin cans in a small garden with only an aloe bush surrounded by gray cement walls. This next poem is about the military crackdown in Rohingya with the Muslims by Myanmar's armed forces and police. Rohingya. Tens of thousands displaced by monsoons wade waist high through sludgy waters. Migration from Myanmar, escaping terror. Groups of men gathered like grapes, grasp bottles of water. Women sit on stones in a semblance of saris. A cluster of children claw tin and plastic bowls like hats doffed in supplication, waiting for their daily dose of sustenance. 1 of every 115 people on the planet is a refugee. And one day, sir, it could be you or me. And I wrote this poem before the pandemic. So when I wrote could be you or me, it was a little bit tongue in cheek, but now I'm not so sure since the pandemic. My younger daughter visited Israel and made some comments to me that inspired this next poem. Birthright trip. My daughter stands on the Golan Heights, the Israeli side of the mountain. Tourists sip espresso at the nearby cafe with a large welcome sign. She photographs the grassy greenery adjacent to Syria and the cracked brown ground of the accursed country. Hears gunshots every few seconds. Her guide informs the group of college kids from many lands that each loud sound is a mother, a father, someone's child being ripped apart by bullets. And on a lighter note, this poem was inspired by my walk with lions when I visited South Africa 2 years ago at a reserve called Botlierskop. Botlierskop. I walked with 2 female lions at the reserve in Mossel Bay. Each of us carried a clubbed stick. We're told never to turn our backs towards the beasts. When the lions stopped to rest, the guide photographed us one by one with our own iPhones. The Xhosa tribesmen held my hand all the way up the rocks so I could perch behind the resting giants. The guide tapped the ground with a long stick to indicate the place where I should stand, far back, so his compatriot could land the perfect portrait. And this next poem, I think, is very fitting for these divided times that we are living in. And it's called Natural Religion. If I were called to construct a religion, I should make use of nature. Going to church would entail a gathering in gardens to have each person hold a brightly colored flower, examine the perfection of petunias. How God in all his glory gifted us with perfectly petaled, glorious gardenias. The quintessential quietness, the light breath of breeze caressing our countenances, the soft summer sun encircling our shoulders. Peace and understanding would not be woven into our psyches with words of wisdom, but imparted with the purity of the perfection of creation. We would not need to be pardoned from sins towards mankind. We would expand our vision with the vitality of naturalness and the beauteousness of the bounty of nature. Nature stands there in all her glory, quietly, comfortably, beautifully. I would bow to the bougainvillea, and we as mankind, with all our choices, would choose to hold hands together and sing Kumbaya. We would sing and dance the garlands of nature encircling our necks. Know somehow that if we could imitate the immaculate imagery of God's imagination, there would be no need for wars and creeds or carnal deeds. We would just look into each other's eyes and be. In this final poem, I capture the nostalgia I still feel for my home country after decades of living in America. Scarsdale. A golden girl, I picked lavender jacaranda blossoms that tumbled onto Johannesburg grasses. As a pink-collared working woman, I watched white dogwood flowers cover the Tarrytown trees in masses. Now, as flame-colored azaleas burst forth every Scarsdale spring, I still feel the thunderclap, the cloudburst that blew a flower petal across 2 continents. And all these poems are in this book that was just published. And that picture on there is me at 18 months. So thank you. It has been a privilege to read for you. And I look forward to hearing the rest of our participants tonight. Thank you.
I'm having a war of the okay. Thank you, Jillian. I'm so glad you got a chance to read for 10 minutes because I've heard like one poem each year, but I think it was very nice to hear a larger amount of poems. I'm going to ask a question before we continue. Everyone here who is a veteran, would you please raise your hand, because this is really about you today. And, you know, I don't want to overlook our veterans because all right, we have Fred. I'm going to move over. Afaa. Okay, hold on this side. Anyone here? Okay. And I think we were talking, oh, and of course, George. George is going to read last because I want him as the veteran to have the last word. And we're going, as Fred mentioned and Afaa mentioned, veterans also come in many forms. And the person who's going to be reading next is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. And her prose piece was written in my class. She was my student. And I don't think she ever intended to read this in front of a lot of people. But no, you're doing it. And I'm very proud of her because it takes a lot of courage, you know, to do this. But she has had the piece published, and I'm going to introduce her now. Oops, I'm sorry. Noises come from everywhere. Okay. So Andrea G. Saden, I finally said your name right. MS, MPH, lives in Scarsdale, New York with her husband, Mark. She has 2 adult sons, Gregory and Joshua, who is engaged to Alidal. After many years of pharmaceutical and health marketing, she has entered the world of identifying and retaining consulting subject matters experts for litigation, dispute resolution, and other strategic input. While her new career, volunteerism, and family life keep her busy, she finds time to pursue her creative interests through writing. Writing has been a portal to her family history and a clarifying path forward. She has published in Read 650, Aish.com, Pause and Reflect, and Scarsdale 10583. She is studying memoir writing at the Writing Institute at Sarah Lawrence College, and I'm very proud of her. And she is going to read her piece titled Spoons.
Thank you. So I'm going to dedicate this reading to my father, who, as Cindy already said, was a Holocaust survivor, but he also came to the United States in 1956 seeking freedom. And of all things, he joined the Army and was in the Army for 20 years. So he was a physician in the Army. Okay, so thank you for having me. At New York City, it's called Spoons of Auschwitz. At New York City's Museum of Jewish Heritage, I walk my 90-year-old father, John Gimmish, through the exhibit, Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away. We slowly wind through the galleries, trying to wrap our heads around the numbers, locations, names, and faces. Born in Hungary in 1930, my father stood with his lively green eyes faded, blinking back tears, as he recalled his own war years as a child in Budapest and the beloved relatives who did not survive. Toward the end of the exhibit, we came upon a showcase entitled Amalgam 1945. It displayed hundreds of mangled utensils that Jews brought to the camp: spoons, keys, scissors, pliers, all soldered together into a disturbing yet beautiful piece of abstract art. We bent over the showcase staring, wondering about the ordinary people who had once held those everyday objects, oblivious to their pending fate. Surely there would have been an old man sipping tea, a mother serving kugel, a child spearing boiled potatoes. The display was a jarring reminder of the time my father and I visited Auschwitz. I recalled my father poking around the dirt with the toe of his black Reebok sneaker near the crematorium. He had found several spoons peeking up from the ground. Despite the dull patina, these spoons captured the morning sunlight, sending out hopeful, glistening rays of silver. They cried out, here we are, witnesses." It was inconceivable that those spoons remained hidden for over 70 years, yet there they were, begging for care. With dust flying, my father bent down, wiped them off, and tucked them into his own coat pocket. Early on, I realized that nothing in my life could compare to the loss of 6 million. My skin knees, disappointments, heartbreaks, and frustrations paled in comparison to my father's childhood. I rarely complained. As much as possible, I buried my own feelings to make more space for him. Watching him in Auschwitz, I wanted to ask my father what memories those spoons conjured, but I feared it would add too much to the heavy yoke of sadness that we already shouldered. Instead of curiosity and connection between father and daughter, I reprimanded him for taking the spoons and not being respectful of that sacred space. My father interrupted my thoughts about our trip together, admitting that he needed a break. Still feeling the weight of the exhibit, we sat in the museum cafe, quietly eating his childhood favorite, poppy seed strudel. He looked at me and asked, "How can we sit here eating this delicious pastry while others face such atrocities? It's not real what people do to each other." We sat in silence, knowing that there are no answers to such unimaginable questions. I held my father's frail, bruised hand as we left the museum cafe. Then, piercing the din of the crowd, I heard the faint sound of wind chimes. I looked down and I saw the spoons we used to stir our coffee and the dessert forks covered with bits of poppy seed magnetically clinging to the metal closure of my handbag. Gently colliding with an invisible clapper, the utensils rang out a gentle tune. There is no such thing as a coincidence. Were the spoons a sign that my father had every right to take back all that Auschwitz had stolen from him, that his family was somehow still with him, or that I would be inextricably entwined with my father's experiences? There is truth in each of these possibilities, but I came to believe that those everyday utensils clinging to me symbolized my father's legacy, a legacy of resilience and hope. He had endured a beastly hell, yet he emerged with his humility intact. He is a complex web of intertwined silver and tin and copper, each thread melting into the next, forming a beautiful matrix of dreams realized and dreams lost, hopes and despairs, tranquil moments, anxieties, passions, brilliance, and above all, the sweetness of life. Thank you.
What's the word? I'm all a clump. That was a beautiful reading. Thank you, Andrea. I'm glad that you decided to be brave and read it. It was a piece that we really need to be reminded of. And her father is still alive. Her father is still alive. He wasn't feeling well, so he wasn't able to come to the reading tonight. So tonight, our last reader is he's a veteran. So this is I want to thank you first, and I think we want to thank all of our veterans tonight. And I've heard you read before, and I am just so thrilled that you are going to be part of this reading tonight. You can unmute yourself already, Juliana. Wait, can you unmute? Oh, do you have to unmute him?
I think I did.
Oh, okay.
You hear me?
Who's Juliana? Okay.
I'm reading undercover.
I see that. Yes. All right. Well, hello, George. George Krause.
Hello.
George Krause holds a doctorate in Hispanic and Luso-Brazilian languages and literatures and a certificate in Renaissance studies from the City University of New York. As a veteran, he has experienced the mechanics of war and has devoted half a century to an arduous exploration of the mechanics and meaning of peace. His poetry takes into account the mechanics and meaning of both. In addition to his work included in the anthology An Uncommon Accord, his prior publications include a chapbook rendition included in the Toad Lily Quartet series. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading today. Included in the anthology An Uncommon Accord. His prior publications include a chapbook rendition included in the Toad Lily Press Quartet series, the Westchester Review, Balanced Rock Review, Dovetails, an International Journal of the Arts, and the Best of Toad Lily Press. He enjoys two places of residence, Tarrytown and Rio de Janeiro, which we may like to join you in next year, in the former pre-COVID. He could have been found in the reading room of the Warner Library or in its basement with OED and the latter, the pre-COVID Cafe Professio. And I just want to say that it's an honor to have you here tonight. I wish you could read even longer. And I know your work is just so appropriate for tonight. And I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Well, it's an honor being with you and listening to the poetry of these marvelous poets. I hope that I can learn something from them. And I hope that I manage to at least come fairly close to what they have already done. I'll be reading a clutch of poems. I'm including in a working manuscript called Crossings at the moment. The first poem I'm going to read is called An Old Salt Dreams. This is sort of a sonnet, if you will. The hotel with mirror overhead. He dreams of tigers, finds the weather red. His nude mime struggles in this underworld without merging with its image overhead. A single mirror that multiplies the world. Those Eastern mirrors in his sudden mind, it was the gleeful time he looked ahead. Red weather, tigers, all he left behind. It all is another port. The weather red. A woman glides across the mirror by chance. He reflects upon her gift, a red rose placed deftly on his chest. Without a glance behind, she leaves its single thorn impose upon his heart, while shades of weather close. And this is a poem that happened to me. Basically, I don't even think I managed to write it. I still don't know exactly what it means, but it's one of these marvelous things that happen to people from time to time. It just came to me. I call it a manner of speaking. It happened to me while I was in a canoe, actually on a lake nearby towards sunset, and I saw this marvelous lotus vision. And so it goes, the bush looms ahead of his canoe, this golden lotus at sunset across the calm lake's silk surface. Closer his cruise to the sapling's momentary Buddha, perched on a rock over dark water, the Buddha's back against the rock wall. Sunlight's visage of this Buddha, the golden leaves shimmer in light wind as he closes upon this figure of peace that allows the Buddha to be seen, while his eyes loom threads of gold leaf into the autumn of his mind, weaving the figure's presence. The Buddha holds this body in his seeing, a figure both seen and seeing, deep enough to speak it. His course closes. He sees parts of the rock wall behind the Buddha's golden lotus, opening now the folds of appearance as the artful one transcends the moment of seeing, and the golden air fades into shadows, leaving alone the shimmering foliage of plant against the rock wall to want itself wholly otherwise said. I have another one. This is for E. Bishop and E. Sosa. E. Bishop, we know, of course, she had many Brazilian friends in her youth. As a matter of fact, lived in Brazil for quite some time with her friends. And the other person I have dedicated this poem to is E. Elio Sosa. He basically survived torture during a change of Brazilian government under the military and managed to survive it. Of course, unfortunately, E. Bishop, Elizabeth Bishop, was basically involved with friends who were left unscathed when the military took over, to put it mildly. Anyway, this is the poem. Hopefully it's self-explanatory. In the canyon between buildings, echoes of cello someone plays, sure fingerings, clear voice of early morning search, the steps one takes to ensure the ears hold on this hour. Then it slowly decays, a wave, after all, that returns to the air's silence. The eternal pearl in her mind, she sings the names she finds in fertile air, praises the coup of 1964 as revolution, quick and beautiful, takes heart in Lotta's friends whose name did not reach the parrot's perch, where he, upside down, sack wired to switch, nude, a canvas of perfect space and time, only Bacon's brush, this quick and desperate. Torture comes to mind, and the screams of names ring in electric air. Where do names go? One must take hammer and chisel to the air, break its hard surface to hear those echoes of beautiful names. Years later, he'll see the man in passing, now with limp and cane, who drew those names from the silent air. Another one, an earlier one. I probably am around 18 years old in this, and I entitled it, Her Address He Finds While Packing Books Some 60 Years Later. I guess we've all run into this kind of thing. Yes, in her handwriting, an old address, where fingers of light touch keys of shadows that keep deep in airs of green woods, and summer's winds circle the great lake. Her gift, the Petoskey stone, smooth in hand, with faces of Devonian corals, mirrors of 200 million years, when some fish began to crawl toward land, to words they soon discover among stones. Rising from coral reefs and waves and sea winds, he now hears the call of her sparkling mind and listens to her voice under trembling skies. He leaves her asleep on dry pine needles. His return south follows a ballet of deer crossing a road in shallow light of dawn. The next poem I have, I call A Prayer for Ben. Ben is my son. And several years ago, we went to a place where my old Marine Corps buddy, Lance Lee, lives in Rockport, Maine. And we stayed on an island that he has basically built a driftwood house on, which he calls the Powder Hole. And so I'm going to read this poem. The fire now a pulse under rising smoke. After ash-baked potatoes, iron pan, seared flounder, then coffee, rum, dates, and dry figs, we sit on damp logs, listen to a story or two of how the Powder Hole driftwood house rose upon a rock built by chance offering of the sea's dice. We watch mythologies of stars cross the sky, listen to the rising sea among dark rocks. The last tale leads to internal reveries of silence before we find the way in moonlight toward the shadow of a house we share with the wind. The wind shifts shadows in moonlight. In sleeping bags we've labeled dream cocoons. We listen closely to the hoofbeats of night until the rising tides of sleep lift us from assemblies of fear. Perhaps an owl's call wakes me. I watch your face in moonlight. Safe from the fates of darkness, you sail into a realm of calm light. Safe if you keep moonlit time in mind, a compass in your hand with needles showing you a course to circumvent archipelagos of madness and penetrate the fog of words and keep you from the reach of a barbarian who procures an election with some trip pins of sinister roulette, and while building the totem of his power, plays another number on the same wheel that would open a passage to your death. Then I have another poem I call Ghosts. This is for Georges Latour, a French painter. Some of his work you can see in the Metropolitan Museum. The dates 1543 and 1652. I happen to like his work very much. But anyway, the poem goes, raise a ghost from I'll start again. Raise a ghost from impermanent wreckage of this squalid moment. The vibrations of 6 o'clock begin. Some ghosts keep crocks of sauerkraut in cellars, fermenting in assemblies of shadows. These ghosts do not announce themselves, nor leave calling cards in the tray at the door. Some prepare to play pinochle in the attic, dressing in fashions found in trunks. Most ghosts refuse garden paths where they are sought by those who attempt contact with a perfect underworld. Some ghosts have an odor of cinnamon. Aunt Ella's ghost, whose breath was mint, never left his mind. Aunt Lily, whose breath was deep nutmeg, never left Aunt Ella's mind in the quiet house lit every night by a single candle's flame in the mirror of grandfather's silence. Uncle Frank's face is always in the mill smoke rising over the bridge that spans the Brown River. A cape of grandmother's shadow surrounds Josephine, now at the window at 6 o'clock, the night with sequins of snow falling under streetlights, kneeling on the couch where she waits for those wandering ghosts who return each night to whisper in her ear. How am I doing for time? Do I have some more? Am I done? I'm done. Hello? I'm done. Okay. Thank you.
This is my least favorite role. I do want to just read one thing that's, I'm sorry, I can't stop this stupid thing. I used to end a lot with the 3 stanzas from the poem by W.H. Auden in memory of in memory of W.B. Yeats, and especially now, because when we were at Dodge Poetry Festival, one of the things that was brought up is that all poetry is a form of praise. And these lines, ever since I was a kid, have been in my heart about poetry. Follow, poet, follow right to the bottom of the night with your unconstraining voice, still persuade us to rejoice. With the farming of a verse, make a vineyard of the curse. Sing of human unsuccess in a rapture of distress. In the deserts of the heart, let the healing fountain start. In the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise. And I just want to thank all of our readers. And I'm going to hand this back over to Jennifer. Take it away. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for your wonderful readings. Thank you all for being here. We have some time for some questions. We already have a question for Afaa from Robin Delabau, who's one of our students at the center. She wants to know if you would tell us a little bit about your writing practice and what poems you're reading these days. Let me ask him to unmute, and I'm going to unmute everyone. At least who have their video on, ask everyone to unmute in case you guys have questions that you want to ask for the readers.
Okay, so I have 2 times that are usually pretty good for writing, early in the morning, then later in the afternoon or evening. And I'll do rough drafts. I'll let them sit and I'll go from draft to draft. And I'm working very slowly on a book about Baltimore, a book of poetry. And I'm trying to determine what structure it should have. and how to handle the history. And I keep my drafts, some of them in the computer, others by hand in notebooks. And I'm reading an ancient Chinese poet, Stonehouse, in translation by Red Pine. And I find the work of those poets who sort of moved away from the hubbub of society, especially in turbulent times like the ones we're living in now, and found some communion with nature. So I try to follow the pathway of Taoist and Buddhist poets. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions from the group? Fred said that he had some questions when. Oh,
I just posted it. Afaa, I wonder if you could say a few words about Lucille Clifton and her importance in your work and thought and life.
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. Thank you, Fred. I was introduced to Lucille in the winter of 74 to 75. A friend took me to a reading that she gave at a public library, a branch of the Enoch Library in Baltimore. And almost right away, she encouraged me. And a few times I drove her to poetry readings. Lucille taught me to trust my intuition. And Lucille was aware of the fact that she was a survivor of a childhood trauma, but I was not. And at that time, in my early 20s. And the method of writing that she taught me, which was, some people call it automatic, but it's just letting go and just writing what, you just sort of empty the mind onto the page. And eventually, over the course of my life, it led me to a conscious awareness of my childhood. And of course, sometimes you don't understand what's happening between you and your mentors until you're older, or at least in my case, leave it to my case. But Lucille was wonderful. And I would call her and say, Lucille, I wrote a poem. You want to hear it? She said, sure, Michael, read the poem. I had no idea how generous she was until now when someone would call me at night and say, can I read a poem to you? I just had no idea of that generosity, And she gave me a copy of X.J. Kennedy's An Introduction to Poetry in the second edition, to let you know how long ago that was. And John Chardy's How Does a Poem Mean? She told me to get that when I was very young. She talked to me about Charles Olson, projective verse, breathing in the line, all those things she taught me when I was working in the factory.
thank you for that. That's great. That's a great answer. Paula has a question. She would like to ask Afaa the same question that Fred Marchant asked the featured poets at the gala, which was before the election. And you were there, Afaa. The question, to remind you, is how do we find hope in these troubled, divided times?
Well, I think if we can practice being in the present moment as much as possible and resist the urge to gloat and understand that it's a very sensitive time right now, and understand that not everyone who voted for Trump is the same. I have a second cousin who's a Marine Corps veteran who's a staunch Trump supporter. He's younger than I am. So the profile's not uniform. And I think this is an opportunity for us to sort of practice that principle of trying to understand rather than be understood. And I think our hope lies in that. And last night, Chris was, my wife is Kristen, who takes classes, some of you know there. And Chris was reading to me Faulkner's Nobel speech near the end. And he said, a poet should construct things that help people endure, And so I think about that. And the Malcolm X poem has helped me endure. I wanted to share that. Mm-hmm. So whatever it is, and I think we have to really think about giving and poetry in the context of giving and listening, because this is a time of turbulent change. And as someone who follows Taoist thought, this is a time of transition when the light side of that circle becomes dark and the dark side becomes light, and that the yin yang symbol, as they call it. Now we're in that point of transition, and it's the pressures on human society are great, you know. So we have to take it easy with each other. You know?
I have a question for Andrea about your father and your his relationship to Auschwitz. That was a really moving piece. I just saw a documentary the other night on Netflix called Numbers, and it was made in 2012, but it was to document the last survivors with the tattoo from Auschwitz. And some of the younger people, they were all in Israel in this documentary. Some of the younger people, just the children and the grandchildren, decided to have their parents and grandparents' numbers tattooed on to them. And I was just wondering if you had ever heard of this or read about it, or what your thoughts are on it.
I never have heard that. I mean, I know many Jews don't have tattoos for that very reason. And they're not supposed to have any, you know, desecration of their own bodies. So that does seem unusual, but I never heard of that. But it might be a good thing. I mean, I just read a study that said how many young people aren't even aware of the Holocaust. So I suppose it's a good way for some to remember what happened. So, but I don't know. You know, with my own father, it took a long time for us to even understand what his youth was like and what happened. I don't even think I was maybe 13 or so when really I started to understand like the whole picture of what he had faced. So I'm not sure he would have been big on that one, but interesting question.
Yeah, it was really interesting, especially when one of the young boys said, the grandfather asked him, "Did you get this to remember me, or to teach people?" And he said, "I got it to so that I will always remember."
Yeah.
I thought it was really moving. But thank you for your work.
Thank you.
We have another question from Lynn McGee, and then maybe we'll have one more question before we let everyone go. Lynn says that she wants to know when you're teaching. I have to look that up and get back to Lynn on that, the exact date. It's in April. And then how do you create and maintain a place for listening and connecting when you teach in a virtual setting? That's a great question for all of us who are teaching online right now.
Well, I'm teaching part-time at Sarah Lawrence, and just happened to be teaching this semester and taught in the spring when we all went from the physical setting to the virtual. And at Sarah Lawrence, each graduate student gets a half-hour one-on-one conference every other week. They have an A-B schedule. And I try to coordinate, especially now, the conferences with the classwork. And in the conferences, I focus on asking them how they feel, you know, how are things going, you know. And at the outset of this semester in the workshop, I said to them, I've given myself the job of maintaining a safe and comfortable environment for you to feel and be creative, understanding that we're going to be in a very difficult semester. I said that at the beginning, understanding what we were headed to, you know. And so it's that. And when we're sharing in the workshop, I've asked them, I started with asking them, concentrate first on how the work that's on the table, so to speak, makes you feel. And from there, let's talk about structure, et cetera. But first of all, I want to see how you feel about this piece. And so the workshop is going well, I think. And I have students all over a couple on the West Coast and in Canada, and one is in Pakistan. So it's a long way, and I try to listen, and I try to be as sincere as I possibly can. So far, I think it's working. And but that's what I do. That's what I do.
Thank you for that. And the last question is from Cindy. First of all, yes, Afaa is right. It is April 11th is the date of his class, and he's going to do a class on the BOP, the form he invented. So definitely sign up for that. And Cindy's question for Afaa is, many people have expressed to her difficulty in writing during the isolation of COVID. Has this influenced you and your current work? Any advice to the writers in the room in terms of writing during this difficult time?
Self-care, 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 you know, and I think I studied playwriting with Paula Vogel when I was at Brown. That was my focus at Brown, theater and playwriting. And she said something I still remember. She said, when you can't do a big thing, do a small thing, you know? If you can't finish an entire poem, collect phrases and lines that move you, you know, and mix them with drawings. You know, I just started sketching and just don't put pressure on yourself to do it. And then read what you love to read once in a while, just to enjoy it, not to take it apart, but just something by someone that you enjoy. And take good care of yourselves, and don't be afraid. You know, fear doesn't produce a whole lot, you know.
Well, we certainly enjoyed hearing all of you read tonight. And I hope you can see in the chat all of the links for the books of these authors. Please support their work. Please read more of their work. Thank you to all of you for being here, all of the colleagues of the readers, teachers of the readers, friends, students, everyone involved in SHP who came tonight. We really appreciate your support, all of the board members who were here. Thank you all. Don't forget that this is recorded and it will be available soon on YouTube. So if you missed part of it, thank you again to Fred for introducing Afaa. And, you know, they won an award together. They were co-winners of an award. They both went to Brown. The connections are
You
very.
didn't see my wink when I read that. I was winking to Afaa, right?
Yeah.
But you're a great audience. Thank you all for being here. And please join us for our next reading, which is Alice Quinn presenting her pandemic anthology that she edited for Knopf. That will be Friday, the 4th of December. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Afaa.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Beautiful.
Great reading, everyone. Really, really good job.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Good night. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks.